Hey, so today I want to talk about utilizing focused note-taking. It's essentially like how to take, but mostly how to use your notes better. Um, so the idea behind focused notes is essentially that it's not about how you take notes as much as it's about what you do with those notes. This means that you don't have to take um, like Cornell style notes where they're on paper, you have to have a column over here, you have to have a summary at the bottom, you have to write questions, you have to organize and things like that. That's a very good strategy. The format of Cornell notes is usually just a way to better organize how you take the actual notes, so I'm not saying anything against it, but when you hear the term focused note-taking, it's usually more about the utilization of the notes than it is about how you're taking the notes. So essentially, why you should be utilizing your notes better is to combat what's called the forgetting curve. Um, Oftentimes they'll tell a teacher that they need to repeat something 8 times in order for a student to really understand it or hear it. That's not just because sometimes students get a little distracted, but it's because the more you tell something to your brain, the more likely your brain is to go, oh, okay, maybe that's important and I should store it. So if you look up the forgetting curve, the idea is if your brain only sees one piece of information at one time, eventually it goes, okay, awesome, and then it starts forgetting it. So usually the forgetting curve starts off with your memory super high, and then it just sort of pitters out as time goes on. The idea behind focus notes and most really good note-taking strategies is that after you take the notes, you should go back to your notes and look at them again, because you have the knowledge when you're first given the knowledge, and then as you forget it, if you show your brain the knowledge again, it kind of pops up to 100% retention instead of kind of dropping down to 70% or 50% and eventually 0% because you forgot whatever it was. Um, so a good rule of thumb in terms of how often you should be reviewing your notes is like by the end of the class, one class period, I'd say within 18 to 20 minutes of first getting a piece of knowledge, you should try to look over it again. And that could be something as easy as just highlighting or underlining or any other, make an abbreviation, something like that. Just before you leave the room of whatever you just learned, you should make a note to yourself. Sometimes people do a summary in that like end of class period time frame. Sometimes they wait until another time, but you should do something with it within 18 to 20 minutes of getting that information. And then the next time period you should, hit your memory. So it's as your memory is going down, the next time you should aim to hit is one day. So oftentimes it's some people end of the day they make a summary. Some people it's the next day, which is why many teachers will give you a bell ringer or a warm up or something like that, or whatever they call it, where it's, hey, this is what we learned yesterday. Remember, guys? Because they're trying to remind you of those things you might have forgotten because your memory is kind of depleting on that. So in that one day mark, you should try to think about what you did. One of the best things that you can do is, again, either write a summary or read the summary you might have written the day before. As a hint, when I tell my students to write a summary, I say, if you were explaining it to yourself, you want to use your own words. What do you think was really important about whatever you just learned? If you imagine yourself a month from now and you ask yourself, hey, how do you do this thing? By default, you're going to go, I don't know, but you know it right now, so how would you explain it to yourself in the future, right? How would you, or if you had some student sitting next to you, some buddy of yours, and they were like, I don't get it, what would you tell your buddy? So that's usually what should be in a summary. So again, 18 to 20 minutes, the first time you really want to look at that information again to kind of stem that forgetful curve, and then one day, and then 1 week, and then 1 month, and then 3 months. So it's, 18 to 20 minutes, one day, 7 to 10 days, about 1 week, 1 month, and then you want to hit it again about 3 months. So that's usually when people are doing, like your half the year or mid-semester or whatever it is. So, within the day, the next day, by the next week, by the next month, and 3 months. So that's the idea, is you're counteracting that forgetting curve. So just you're trying to show your brain the information more and more. So let's get into kind of the steps in focus note taking. They are to help you try to remember it better. You took notes, you shook the notes, you look at the notes, and then you hook kind of your brain with the notes. So if we just take took, this is where you're physically like taking the notes in the moment. And it could also be that like 18 to 20 minutes after you're taking the notes, what you're doing with them, right? The notes should be in your own words because it's better for your brain to access it later. They can be in any style you want. I have a bunch of examples at the end of the video of various ways to take notes. Many of them are from my own students and the way I've had them take notes and show me notes. They should be organized. So sometimes organization looks like Cornell notes to somebody. Sometimes it's just a title and a date. Maybe it's just the date because of whatever you're working on. Maybe it happens to be a title and subsections, or maybe you're in English and it's chapters, or whatever else you're doing. You should be able to go back and find those notes on whatever topic you need to look at. So find what's organized for you, but make sure they're organized. And they should also be abbreviated. Oftentimes, especially the harder classes you take, so when you're going from elementary to middle to high to college, it gets harder and harder, and more information gets thrown at you, which means you're not going to be able to copy down verbatim everything the teacher is writing on the board or everything they're speaking or saying. So oftentimes you need to find some way to shorthand what you're doing. If that's instead of writing at or around or about, sometimes people use the at symbol. They will just use some abbreviated initials. If it is a word or something that is big and it's very common for whatever course you're taking, instead of writing out, a chemical by their full name, just know the chemical thing. It'll help you in 2 ways, right? One, knowing the periodic table, and one, trying to remember it and take shorter notes. So abbreviate your notes. Make sure that they are shortened, that you have some kind of key or legend that you know what everything stands for. And that way, in the moment, you're not trying to write every single thing down, because as you're trying to process everything, you're getting half of it. You're missing something. So the more abbreviated you can get, the more kind of an outline you can get, the better it is. Now, this doesn't always work as much in math. Sometimes in math you have to write down every single piece. This might be one of those times where when you're writing the steps to the problem, because it's a really, really good idea if you have a symbolic way of writing math, if you also next to it write like a verbal how-to process. If you're in the moment, you don't have to write out everything you would use in a sentence talking to a person, but you can kind of write down, add to both sides, or you can just go plus both sides instead of you should add the same thing to both sides. Like one you would speak to somebody, one you just kind of quickly write in notes. So put them in your own words. You can put them in any style you want. They can be digital, they can be on paper. They should be organized, and you should be using them efficiently, so you should be abbreviated. Shook, this is when you're doing it the 20 minutes after, 18, 20 minutes after, or the next day. You're revising your notes. Maybe you compare them with a buddy, which is awesome and amazing. Maybe you're just editing them. Maybe you're trying to add in some of those sentences that you weren't sure about, or correct things because maybe you thought one way, and by the end of the lesson and you did some practice, you learned something else. Highlighting things. So as you were doing some practice, or as you were going through this, or as you're rereading it, you're like, oh, that, I didn't know that I know, but that sounds like it's really important. Highlight it, like circle it, use an actual highlighter, underline it, whatever it means to you. If something should stand out, make it stand out. And then the last one I have here is add. Especially if you're comparing notes with a buddy, or if you've gone through some practice and you notice that there was something you were missing, or there was a homework problem or a homework sentence or phrase that you saw that was like, oh, that helped me. Add it to your notes. It doesn't, if it's a big problem, a big paragraph, and it took you a lot, maybe your addition is just see page so-and-so in book blah, blah, blah. Or you can copy a whole thing. A wonderful use of an object is to take an actual just sticky note. And they make sticky notes that stick like to almost every single part. They make sticky notes. Put a sticky note on things. That's a really good, easy way to kind of add something that you can view later that you don't have to keep forever, or you can keep it forever. So shook, you're revising it somehow, okay? Look, so this is where you're doing the forgetting curve part of it. So it's after the day, it's after you've looked at it again the next day. This is when you're looking at it the week after, the month after, the 3 months after, right? Mostly this is kind of the week after, or the next day. It's looking is you're reviewing it to make sure it's all done and final. This is where if you have not already done a summary, you want to make sure you're putting a summary on it. Within that first day would be best, but within a week, but the closer you get to the moment of you learning it, the easier it is to make that summary. But this is where you might be revising that summary. So you took the notes in the moment, you shook the notes by the end of the class period. Sometimes you can make it go at the end of the day by kind of adding things, checking with a buddy, highlighting. You're looking over the notes. This is usually within that same day. I tell my kids end of the day is really good. Try to at least be 2 hours after the class period. You want to make sure you write the summary. So within the first day, summarizing is perfect. In your summary, think key concepts. If you can apply it to any other topic or area that you've been working on, and if it's a math problem, any other math problem, if it's a book, was there a theme that you were going? Was there a theme that you've previously done or a different book that you've seen? So application can mean several things. It's where can you make connections, really. So applications or connections. And then this is where if you actually still have questions, again, the night of, the day of, you're going over your notes and you're like, I still am lost with this. Try to be as specific as you can. Don't just be like, oh, I don't get it. Where can you go? How far can you get before you actually get stuck? Because you want to approach your teacher or professor with, here's where I got stuck. So again, so we took the notes, we shook the notes by revising, adding, highlighting, and now we've looked at them and summarized them. The very last thing is the hook part. This is the part that I cannot stress the most. The hook is the reviewing and the reviewing and repeating. You want to make sure you have a plan for this, and you want to cycle them through. Yes, you want to look at them the next day, but then you don't have to look at it again for another week, and then you don't have to look at it again for a whole month, right? 3 months. So you kind of want to make a plan for when am I going to see this again? When am I going to see it again? It's 7 to 10 days. So maybe you take notes for 3 days and then you look at all of them at the end of the week, or you do it on Saturdays or Sundays or whatever your days are, because your days can change. But you want to review your notes and you want to keep repeating it. It's the repeating. Remember, 18 to 20 minutes the next day, the next week, the next month, the next 3 months. That's kind of the cycle you want to get into. And that's where you're going to hook yourself. Really, the big part, the big part about focused note-taking is the hook part, that counteracting that forgetting curve. The more often you look at your notes, the more likely you are to be telling your brain, instead of thinking, oh, this information, oh, don't need that. You're telling your brain, no, that information is probably important. It's going to be on some test that I'm going to have later, or I'm going to need to use it to do something. I need to remember it. So some examples that I have. This one is just regular on paper Cornell notes. You can see that there's a date, there's a title. You would usually have your name up here. You might have some questions on the side. Usually questions can be answered on this side. These are all the meat of your notes. And then at the very bottom there's a summary. What's the important things that you get in there? What's those key concepts? You're going to summarize them. This is when you're looking at your notes again and you have a whole bunch of them to look at, because you're looking at them again in a week, in a month, in 3 months, and there's a lot of notes that you can take in 3 months. If you just go through and you're looking at your summaries again, because it should be in your own words, you're reteaching yourself how to do the things. And you can have a whole lot of notes with only a little bit of summary. I've had students ask me before if they have notes that take up more than 1 page. What should they do? Should they do one summary for the whole set of notes, or should they summarize each page? My answer to them for that is, if you think that you can capture all of the information of 2 pages in one summary, then that should be okay. But I would strongly recommend just thinking about what is contained in 1 page and summarizing that 1 page. I think that would be a more efficient way to do things. Instead of trying to cram everything into one summary, just summarize 1 page at a time. So we have a physical paper way of doing it, and there's also a digital way. This is one of my students that I had in AVID. She took notes for an AP Language Arts class, and she wrote her questions on this side. She had some notes over here. She used Google Docs, I believe, or Word, one of those two, digital kind of wordish thing. This was a preset format that I gave her, but you can set it up yourself or find one. But she had notes on this side, and at the very bottom, she summarized her notes. This was digital, so on paper, digital, you can accomplish the same thing. It depends on what your preference is. This is an example of what a worksheet would look like. So things that I wanted to point out with this one is this is several different problems that are worked through. On the right side, there is like how to, like what are those next steps? How can I do that, right? So you can see like when you see evaluate, think PEMDAS, like that's what you're going through. And then there's a sticky note that is put on the worksheet to summarize it. You don't have to, notes doesn't have to be thought of as traditional, right? You can take notes any way you want. If you're physically doing worksheets and that's what your class is, you're doing something, summarize what you're doing. Let's say you have a bunch of PowerPoints that you have access to. You can put your notes in the bottom of the PowerPoint. Or again, if you are taking notes traditionally in a workbook, you can have the summary at the bottom of the page, or you can stick it with a sticky note. Feel free to utilize highlighters, underlining, arrows. See, this is a lot of great things going on. Maybe you're doing it in Word. So I've had some students that take notes, like their professors give them either PowerPoint or a Word document or PDF. And there's programs out there that'll let you take notes on it. You can print them out or you can do them digitally. You can make comments, you can add comments in, and that's how you can be doing your summaries, is putting comments in there. Essentially, what I want you to get from this is no matter what you're doing in class, you should be able to think about what you did, summarize what you did, and then remind yourself over and over again about what you did. That's kind of exactly what Focus Notes is focusing yourself on utilizing your notes. Not just taking notes, but how are you going to use them afterwards? Because if you only ever take notes and then you kind of file them away, that's exactly what your brain is doing. Okay, that's important. Not. So you want to make sure that you're going back and checking again. So sorry for repeating myself so many times, but it's useful for you, right? And you want to repeat your notes, repeat it to yourself. First 18 to 20 minutes, so end of class period, end of the day, so one day, end of the day, and then the next day. So don't just think that's two different things. So you want to see it at the end of the class period, 2 hours after the class period. The next day you should look over your notes again to make sure there's nothing you missed, within a week, within a month, within 3 months. Just to try to help you, I'm trying to think of all the things that students have come to me with, and they're wondering how can they take notes on this, or what can they do. So let's say you have a class that there's nothing that gets written on the board. It's something that's more like an English or language arts class, right? Or like a theater class. Something where you're physically going somewhere and you're doing some kind of activity and there's a discussion about it. Well, I tell my students, after your class, you can still sit down and rethink about all the things that you did in class. Was there a poem that you went over, or a passage, or a text, or whatever it was? What did you talk about? What was the actual discussion? And when you were looking at the teacher or the other students, what were they emphasizing? Write that down. Right after class, write it down. And then the next day, read over it again. Because I'm sure that whatever they did in class was on purpose, and that it was meant to build towards something. So, think about summarizing what you did in class, and it could be you writing down the activities you did in class. So again, to reiterate, Focus Notes, took, shook, look, hook. Take the notes any way you want. Make sure you're editing them and revising them. Make sure you're summarizing them. All this stuff happens in the first day or two. And the hook is that repeating yourself. After you've given yourself a wonderful summary, and you've already retaught yourself because your summary is so great, reteach yourself in a week, in a month, 3 months. Okay? So I hope this has helped. If there's any questions you have, I love helping and adding things and getting better, so feel free to make a comment.